Okay. Well, welcome. My name's Sam Liccardo. It's my honor to serve you as mayor, and I want to welcome everyone to our first of what will be several community budget meetings. This one will be entirely in English, but we will have additional meetings. I know starting, let's see, we have a community meeting on Saturday, and then another one, I think, on the 18th that will have a Spanish language translator if you have any friends or family who'd like to join us in Spanish. And then thereafter, one meeting in Vietnamese, and we'll talk about that. That's the 20th. Great, thank you, Henry. That'll be on the 20th. So we're going to continue to have these meetings, and by all means encourage neighbors or friends to join us. I am joined today by several senior leaders on our city team. I'll just introduce them, and then they may be jumping in at different times as questions come in from members of the community, and they'll be able to offer their own expertise. Grateful to have Jill Bourne, our Director of Library and all things educational here in the city, and Andrea Maestre, who also serves as a senior official in our library team, Nancy Klein, Office of Economic Development, John Cicerelli over at Public Works. I'm sorry, not Public Works. He's the Director of Parks and Neighborhood Services, Parks, Recreation, Neighborhood Services. Heather Randall, who is a Assistant Chief in our Police Department. And Jim Shannon, who's the man responsible for producing these very large binders like this one here that we're all burdened with this time of year. He's our budget director, and his team have not been getting much sleep lately as they put together what was just released this last night, I believe, as the city manager's proposed city budget. That contains sort of a first cut at how our city is going to grapple with the very significant deficit that we know we have in the coming year. We really are grateful to him and his team for all their hard work, really dealing with a very, very uncertain situation. I think everyone recognizes that there are no crystal balls here. And what Jim and his team have done is essentially use the best estimates they can to try to understand how to make good decisions, the best decisions we possibly can make at a time of limited information. So what I'd like to do in this meeting is to present some basic information about the budget and about the process, so everybody understands how that works. And then I'd like to go to members of the community, and everyone has up to 2 minutes to either ask a question or offer any observation you might want to make. And we will be happy to try to respond to those questions. It has dawned on me, I'm looking at the number of participants, and now we're well over 100. So in the interest of time, let me ask this. Let me just ask if everyone could confine their questions or comments to 1 minute, and hopefully that will enable enough time for a response if you're looking for an answer to a particular question from one of our resident experts here. I'm going to share my slides here with everyone. Hopefully I'll get this right. Here's the PowerPoint. And I just want to check in, Jim and Joe, are you able to see that?
Yes.
Okay,
sure.
Great. Wonderful. So here is our proposed budget. And I'm going to ask Henry to help me figure out how I'm going to move from one.
Yeah, the front. Just push.
Okay. Huh. I don't think that's going to work. We'll keep trying. Okay. Apparently, there we are. Thank you. All right, we're all becoming Zoom experts in this era. So here's our agenda. We're going to talk a little bit about the process and the timeline, the impacts, obviously, of COVID on what we're doing. What is the proposed budget, some of the anticipated service reductions, and then get right to your questions and your comments. So thank you all for taking the time. Every member of the community, we know your time is scarce and you've got families and careers and jobs to worry about, and we appreciate you taking the time to join us. Okay, first, here's the process. You are here. That is this period in the middle of May when we're engaged in community budget meetings. We've already had an early round, a budget message I released way back in early March, well before we knew much about what was coming. At that point, I noted in my budget message, we had just had our first case of community transmission. And I had expressed very serious concerns about what was likely to happen, given the fact we knew there was community transmission and likely had been happening, as we now know, for many weeks already. And so I proposed a budget that essentially set aside more than $50 million of revenues and savings to ensure that we would have some cushion for a rough road ahead. And a rough road is what we've got now. So the good news is the council approved that direction. We now have the proposed operating budget, as you can see, as released last night. We'll have several study sessions over the next several days, and then some initial public hearings with the council on the 21st. And I will release a June message on June 8th. That will essentially be my final word on what I believe we can pay for and what we can't. And then we'll have a final round of hearings and council decisions on that message. So that's what's coming. We're right in the middle of the process, so you got here at the right time. All right, so obviously we're dealing with a pandemic, and that's had huge impacts on our community as well as on our city organization. And so I just want to describe a little bit about how our city organization has been forced to really shift and pivot in a very big way. As you can see by the first bullet, we're distributing more than 2.5 million meals a week to people, not just in our city, but cities throughout the county. We took on that responsibility at the request of the county as the large city in the region. We recognize that is a responsibility of ours. The challenge, of course, is that we've got to find a way to pay for all of that. And we also need people to be able to help organize and ensure that distribution to people. And so we have essentially repurposed 160 employees who might have been previously working in a finance department or libraries or somewhere else, and they were becoming food distribution experts. And I'm just so grateful that so many members of our city team have been so incredibly nimble and so willing to do whatever it takes to help serve a community in time of need. And I think they're doing an incredible job under the very difficult circumstances they're facing. We're also taking on distribution of other critical needs. We know a lot of families without a paycheck now can't afford the basic things for their babies, like diapers and infant formula. And so along with our food distribution, we're taking that on as well. We've been raising a lot of money. That number is now more than $25 million that we've raised for needy families. These are many of our hardworking families in our community that simply don't have paychecks right now. We raised another $1.5 million for small businesses. We just started the small business grant program a couple of days ago. Those are small $10,000 grants for small businesses that need them to keep folks aboard, and we want to do everything we can to help. And of course, we've been really tremendously buoyed by the volunteer energy in our community. As soon as we put up the SiliconValleyStrong.org website, we had, within a matter of hours, more than 2,000 volunteers, now more than 3,300 volunteers. They're volunteering primarily in helping us distribute food and other necessities, but we are grateful for all the work that our many volunteers are doing. And of course, we've been hustling to try to ensure we can get more testing sites available in San Jose in partnership with the county. And we've been able to make some recent very positive announcements. Verily doubling its capacity now, serving our residents with free testing. Emphasize free testing. You don't need insurance. You don't need to pay. You just need to go online to register, and you can get tested at the Verily site at the county fairgrounds or at Pal Stadium. And there are additional testing sites available through OptumCare and other providers throughout the city as well. If you're a Kaiser member, you can certainly go to Kaiser. So we want to encourage everybody to get tested. Cost is no barrier to that. All right. We know that the most severe impacts in many ways of this virus. You know, the good news is our community has done an incredibly good job of flattening the curve, of really following the orders of our county public health authorities. And that has saved thousands of lives, to be sure. It is obviously tragic that we've lost more than 100 lives in our county as a result of this. But the good news is we've saved thousands as we look at what's happening in other places throughout the country. But of course, we know that this is a pandemic that's impoverishing many of our families. And these are estimates that were provided by a consultant that we're working with, BCG, about what it looks like for many of the industries over the next year or so. And what you're seeing are percentage drops essentially in gross domestic product or sales. That would be the best shorthand to describe basically the revenues that are generated in these in these industries. And obviously, it's most severe in areas like leisure and hospitality. That means hotels, travel, and then of course in retail trade. As you can see, those are the two most severely impacted sectors. And that matters obviously because we have a lot of residents who are employed in restaurants and hotels, at the airport, in driving for Uber or Lyft, or driving a taxi, or working in a retail store. So that's a huge impact on all of them. It's also a big impact on the city because we depend a lot on those sectors to provide us with tax revenue. And then, of course, the real impact of jobs is very real. This is a study really on what are the most vulnerable counties with regard to job loss or other vulnerabilities. And by vulnerable, we mean someone who is, for example, losing hours or losing pay, or maybe is having to be on furlough or losing their job altogether. And what we're seeing is that roughly 34%, about a third of our jobs in this county, are vulnerable in some way to one of those outcomes, meaning folks are losing income. And that is obviously a huge challenge to many families who are already struggling. Okay, so we know the budgetary impacts will follow with the economy, and that means we're tightening our belt. We also have increased expenses to respond to the new needs in the face of this pandemic. And we've got a lot of closures and unemployment that we're grappling with in the months ahead. We know these are tough times, so we're going to have to pull together to get through them and get to the other side. What we're seeing in cities throughout the state is severe losses in revenues. This is nothing new, and this is nothing unique. And it is a challenge. We also know there are lots of new expenses that cities are having to spend money on for things like PPE and ensuring that all of our workers can work remotely to the extent possible. The federal funding support, although there's been a lot of talk about dollars, and I know that there's already been claims of various employee groups that we should be using federal dollars for particular uses. The problem is that it's not up to us, it's up to the federal government. And specifically, the statute that provides for those dollars, and most prominently be the CARES Act, which has enabled direct funding of more than $178 million to the City of San Jose. We can't use that money to fill for gaps in our budget. We can't use it to pay, for example, for librarians or for police officers that we previously had budgeted. It can only be used for essentially pandemic response and for a very limited set of expenditures. And if we were to try to do otherwise, we'd face severe repercussions. In other words, we'd have to backfill and pay for whatever we spent. And that just puts us deeper in a hole. So we've got to follow the rules with the federal funding. And so I know you'll hear quite a bit in the media about what federal dollars may or may not be available. As of yet, most of those dollars are not dollars that we can tap for basic city services. So here's what typical budget looks like. It is divided into three general categories. And some of you who've been along for the ride on previous budget discussions of mine are familiar with this chart. You've got three basic categories: a general fund, the capital funds, and special funds. I'm going to just describe what they are very briefly. Special funds are funds for particular enterprises that we have, for example, the airport or the sewage treatment plant. These are dollars that have to be used. They're restricted for the particular enterprise where they're generated. For example, we have sewer fees that are paid under law. They can only be used to support the sewer system and the water treatment system. And those are the only places those dollars can go. We can't use them to pave streets or to put librarians in libraries. They can only be used for those purposes. Similarly, at the airport, we generate passenger fees and fees from airlines. Those can only be used under federal law at the airport for those purposes. So special funds, about $2 billion. Now, also a really key component of this, very large component, is San Jose Clean Energy, our energy utility, which is providing now electricity to 99% of our residents and businesses at a cost lower than PG&E's. That's good news. we cannot tap any of that money for any other purpose under the law. So it is what it is, and for the most part, our budgetary discussions don't tend to wander into those special funds very often. The capital funds, as the name implies, are really used for capital construction, either for land acquisition or for actually building things. And again, typically those dollars are restricted under the law. For example, if a developer pays a fee, a parks fee, or an affordable housing fee, those dollars are then used for capital construction for affordable housing or for parks. They can't be used, for example, to pay for park maintenance typically, or for a park ranger. They can only be used to actually build out a park or buy land for a park. So again, those are very restricted funds, but we have about $1 billion there because we have big projects going on, for example, at the water treatment plant and other places. And then obviously the general fund, the $1.1 billion, that is the place where all the conversation focuses. Those are the dollars that are the most flexible, and those are the dollars that tend to fund the services that most of our residents depend on and think of most often when we consider city services, that is police and fire and libraries and planning and many other purposes. Okay, so this is what our general fund looks like, the $1.1 billion. This is estimated based on the city manager's projections. Obviously, this can all change. As we know, it will change because this economy is shifting very quickly under our feet. But as you can see, the two primary sources of revenue are property tax and sales tax. Property tax will remain relatively constant in the coming year. It will drop significantly 2 to 3 years out as people file their Prop 8 applications with the assessor's office and reduce their property tax assessments. So we'll feel that pain in a couple years. It's just not yet. Sales tax will feel immediately, and there'll be significant drops there. And there are other taxes that will also be very sensitive. You see one at the top that says transit occupancy tax. That's our hotel tax. And we expect that will have a very steep drop as well. So the shortfall that's estimated for the next year is a little less than 70. Well, the revenue shortfall is almost $79 million. We're going to be cutting some expenditures are actually going to be cut. And so the total deficit is $72 million. I should say that the $72 million shortfall is on top of another $45 million deficit that we just solved 2 weeks ago for the current year. So let me explain how it works. The current fiscal year ends on June 30th of this year. The next fiscal year begins on July 1st. So we knew right away as soon as COVID hit, what we had was a surplus of a few million bucks. That went away instantly. We suddenly had a $45 million deficit because of all the expenditures we had to make to address the COVID crisis, and the incredible steep drop in the economy killed a lot of revenues. So we used a lot of reserves to address that $45 million deficit we had in this current year. Now we've got a $72 million deficit we've got to fix for the coming year. And let me just explain the good news. The good news is that for 5 years, we've been tightening our belt, and we've been very disciplined about how we've been spending. We've been avoiding a lot of ongoing commitments for expenditures. We have been saving money. We've been paying down debt, and we've been building reserves. So all of that hard work we've been doing during the good times for the last 5 years is helping us at a time like this, because we were able to address that $45 million deficit without any cuts in service whatsoever, because we had reserves built up. We've been saving money. It's going to be obviously a lot harder going forward. So let's talk about how we're going to do it going forward. The revenue drop that we're facing, based on the last estimate from the City Manager's Budget Office, about 9%. That compares with a drop in revenues during the Great Recession, about 5.5%, and the dot-com bust, almost 3%. So what we're seeing, what we're projecting is worse than the Great Recession, appropriately, based on all we know about the economy. We may be at 20, 25% unemployment by the time we're done here. And it would not surprise me one bit if our revenue drop was even worse than 9.3%, based on what I'm hearing from other sources, including the state of California. So here's what it looks like. The steepest drops, of course, are in business tax and sales tax, but lots of drops throughout our revenue sources, for a net loss of nearly $79 million. If there are areas where I would suspect that our losses could be quite a bit worse, It would probably be in areas of hotel tax and sales tax where we're seeing other projections even worse. Sales tax projection is a 16% drop. I know the state is using a 27% drop as their estimate. So it gives you a sense of what the range of estimates are out there. Right now, the truth is nobody knows. We're just going to use the best numbers we can. So our balancing strategies for fixing this, I mentioned there was a $45 million shortfall in the last year. That is our current year, I should say. We've addressed that fully with hiring freezes, with vacancy savings, uses some reserves and savings, and suspending some of our non-essential expenditures. The harder cuts come obviously in the next year, and that's where we're going to have to cut some ongoing spending. We're going to use some more savings, and we're going to use some creative refinancings and some partnerships with local companies that are going to help us out with revenue. So I'll talk to you a little bit about that. There are ways in which we can reduce costs, and one of those is through refinancing, and our Department of Finance has been really exceptional in recent years in providing us some real big savings that are helping preserve a lot of city services. Most recently, we're taking on the City Hall debt refunding pursuant to my March budget message, and we think that will deliver significant savings to us. And of course, we're going to be using various reserves that we've been saving up in the good times for tough times like this. The reality is the toughest conversations are going to be around that bullet that you see on the right side of the page, the top bullet, department service level reductions. We're simply going to reduce services, and that's the reality of having not enough money. And it won't be just this year. I expect it will continue the following year as well, because recessions are never over that quickly, and this one certainly won't be. It's going to be a tough haul for us, and we're going to have to take on these very difficult decisions in a very collaborative and transparent way. So this is the beginning of that effort. We have engaged in some creative partnerships, and I really want to thank eBay for their efforts to work with us on a revenue capture agreement that ensures that about $20 million will be able to be preserved in revenue to the city that will offset what would have been even much tougher cuts that we'd have to make in the months ahead. And of course, because we used some savings to pay off debt, as I recommended in March, that's going to reduce some of our costs on going on forward on financing. And we're doing some other things to reduce costs and retirement funding as well by pre-funding our obligations there. So we'll talk a little bit about the past. As you can see, we know very well those days of the Great Recession when we saw those very significant deficits. For 3 years, it averaged about $100 million a year. As you can see, we're back in that time frame again. The current deficit exceeding 70 million. It would not surprise me if within a few weeks we see that number get even steeper, but that's where we're at right now. Through some very painful cuts and decisions we made in 2011 and 2012, we were able to balance those budgets. We'll have to make similar kinds of decisions, though not the same ones. Obviously, we've learned some lessons that we won't repeat some of those mistakes, but we know that some of those very tough decisions about cutting will have to be made again. Okay, here's our 5-year general fund forecast based on what we saw way back in February. You could throw this out the door because it doesn't matter. This is what we projected if we had a recession sometime in the 2021-22 timeframe. This is what it would look like. Of course, we know that recession, in fact, is now accelerated considerably, and it's quite a bit steeper too. Back then, we projected a recession would put us in a deficit scenario of 53 million. We know it's going to be quite a bit deeper here. All right, so here are the service reductions that are anticipated in the city manager's proposed budget. 103 positions that are eliminated. Most of these are vacant positions or can be resolved through what we call bumping. So we won't actually be pushing employees out the door. That's the good news. We'll be able to keep our city team intact, but obviously services will suffer in all of these areas. And I think most prominently, I think you'll probably hear a lot about libraries and parks in particular, because I know those are some of the services that are closest to our residents. And I know we'll probably hear a lot of concerns about those cuts. I'll talk about those in a moment. First, we'll start with public safety. We're going to eliminate some vacant community service officer positions. And we're also going to halt what we call our hire ahead program for officers. You know, basically, we had big ambitions about rebuilding our police department after all the cuts during the Great Recession. And we were making great progress, adding more than 200 police officers over a period of time, which we were aggressively hiring, and we were doing a great job of rebuilding. And we created a community service officer program that was also helping to take some of the workload off of our officers. The bad news is we're simply going to stop that pace of rebuilding. The good news is we're not laying CSOs or police officers off as we had to back in 2008. Now, obviously, all of this is based on what we know today. What we know tomorrow or next week could change dramatically. So this is just based on our current city manager's projections from their budget office. And so these are the tentative proposed cuts for this June. And then I mentioned both parks and libraries. We're going to be having to discontinue a lot of the placemaking events that we had. Part of that is simply compelled by the nature of our public health crisis. We know that Viva Calle, Viva Parks, and all those kinds of wonderful events that we hope we'll be able to bring back as soon as possible, they wouldn't be that likely to happen anyway based on the public health order. Similarly, the aquatic programs, our public pools, those are programs that we were not likely to be able to manage. So we're simply going to cut the program, save the money for now, repurpose it for city savings. So hopefully we can come back stronger in future years. And then of course, family camp at Yosemite as well. We know all of these programs were greatly valued by our families, and we want to do everything we can to get them back just as soon as both the public health situation and the economy enable us to do so. Next on libraries, this is some real bad news, I know, for many library lovers who have been buoyed by the incredible success our library team has had at rebuilding that department and really not just restoring services, but transforming services in a way that have made our libraries so much more relevant in the lives of our families, particularly of our young students. We are going to be reducing public operating hours by 4 hours a week. We know that will affect families. We're going to do everything we can to soften the blow in every way we can. There are a small number of one-time funded programs last year that have been included. Some have been cut. And some of the ones that have been eliminated are Downtown Foot Patrol program, a program we had for homeless residents where we essentially a pilot program where we paid them cash in exchange for their willingness to clean up and provide bags of trash to us. And then the Beautify San Jose neighborhood grants, that program has been scaled back a bit, so there won't be as many grants this year as in years past. Okay, so there are some areas, though, we're going to maintain our focus. And it's important for everyone to know that despite the downturn, we're going to keep our commitment to voters. Just this March, we passed Measure E with 53% support of our voters to dedicate revenue from a property transaction tax to affordable housing and permanent housing for homeless residents and affordable housing for residents and families of various income levels. The good news is we are maintaining our commitment, as I expect we will continue to do so, to ensure every dollar that's generated through that source remains for affordable housing. What you see in the background here are tiny homes that were finished recently, just east of 101. Actually, this is not far from my house, over off of Mayberry Road. We've got a second site under construction today that will also house another 40 or so homeless individuals. This is transitional housing that's helping folks get back on their feet. Many of you may have read we have 3 other sites where we're building with prefab modular housing, transitional and shelter housing for homeless individuals, for more than 300 individuals and families. And one of those projects is under construction now. It should be done within the next 3 or 4 weeks, which is tremendous pace, and we're happy to see that work accelerate. And then Measure T. This is a measure that passed back in 2018, you may recall. This was promoted as an infrastructure and public safety measure because that's what it pays for, a lot of capital needs in that space. By infrastructure, we mean things like road replacement and repair and repaving. So last year, we were able to repave more miles of roads than we have in the last quarter century, and we're going to continue to maintain that level of road paving because we know our roads need a lot of work and there's a lot of jobs there, and that's a good thing. Public safety, we're going to continue, for example, with the construction of Fire Station 37 and the other kinds of public safety improvements that were contemplated in that Measure T. And then one that's gotten a lot of media attention, I know, the $50 million or so that we're spending to preserve land in Coyote Valley in partnership with Open Space Trust and Open Space Authority. And that's going to help us in various ways, but certainly with public safety, reducing wildfire risk to the southern edge of our city, reducing flooding risk to our downtown and southern parts of our city, as well as protecting our underground aquifers and our water supply, ensuring we have clean water, in addition to the many environmental benefits. So all of those spending commitments will go forward as planned, as we committed to the voters. And then there's also a lot of programs that we want to continue to maintain that will be supporting opportunity. Our bridge program for transitional jobs for the homeless, our San Jose Works program, which has helped more than 4,000 teenagers get their first job in summertime. Obviously, a lot of that's going to depend on the public health order about how much we're going to be able to do and where. And then, of course, our after-school learning programs through San Jose Learns, focusing on our lowest income communities where we know it's so hard for kids to be able to get access to those programs. We're going to continue supporting those programs. We know how essential they are in the community. I'm proud each one of those programs started when I was mayor, and we want to do everything we can to keep our commitment, to keep those programs moving forward. And we're going to try to find new opportunities amid this crisis. And we think there are actually opportunities in this crisis. Is incredible the hardships are for so many of our families, and as terrible a time as this is. We think there are opportunities here. And one of those opportunities is in closing the digital divide. I was just on the phone on a Zoom call today with an executive with a tech company, and they're starting to get involved with us. We've had, I've got about $1 million in commitments so far over the last few weeks, and we're going to continue that work to get more commitments. And we may have some opportunities with federal dollars as well to try to get more of our youth online so that they can learn. We know distance learning is essential right now because schools simply cannot educate kids without online access. And so we've worked very hard with our partners, for example, at the County Office of Education, Marianne Dewan. Captain Dewan's been, or I'm sorry, I should say Dr. Dewan has been really instrumental in our efforts, along with Eastside Union High School District and others, where we're building out some infrastructure to help expand Wi-Fi opportunities. We've already had more than 6,000 families around James Lick High School able to get online for free with a Wi-Fi network that's provided jointly between school district and the city. We're under construction on another one around Overfelt High, and then we'll begin Yerba Buena thereafter, and very soon other school areas, the catchment areas, the enrollment areas for those high school and their surrounding neighborhoods will then be connected, and lots of families will be able to get online and their kids will be learning. That's critical for us. Housing the homeless, I mentioned that there are opportunities for us to move more quickly with prefab and modular housing, transitional housing for the homeless. The opportunity here is that the state has waived many of the barriers, the red tape, CEQA laws, and requirements that would ordinarily take us years to get through to begin construction. And we're able to build, in one case, the project we have under construction, we can build in 4 weeks, what might have taken us 4 years to build. And so we want to take advantage of this opportunity to actually address these crises that we have around distance learning and homelessness. And then, of course, seeing how we can support resilience in our city by bringing our commerce outdoors. You may have heard of this just recently, initiative that I introduced with Councilmember Deb Davis, San Jose Al Fresco. We know we have 300 days of sun a year. We should be taking advantage of that. I think many of us would enjoy seeing more of our restaurants and our other businesses outside. We think there's a great opportunity for yoga studios and gyms and retailers of various kinds to be able to be outside if we make it safe for them to do so. And that will enable, hopefully, for them to be able to reopen at a time that the county deems is appropriate. Obviously, it'll be incumbent upon any change in decision of the public health authorities for us to be able to get those businesses open. But we hope by creating this outdoor model of commerce, it may be something that sticks with us in the long term to make our streetscape and our city more vibrant. Okay, so a June message will be coming on June 8th. We'll be telling you more about that in the weeks ahead. And of course, there may be additional budget reductions if it looks as though these numbers are in fact not pessimistic enough. I know that's pretty bad, but yes, they can be worse. As we see more data coming in about sales tax revenue and the timing of economic reopening being slowed or sped up, that's going to change everything about our budgetary projections. And we are, essentially planning that we may be coming back in early fall in September with another $12 million in cuts, essentially, with potential position eliminations, because we know we're not done here. And there's a lot we don't know, and we're going to learn a lot in the next few weeks. And so we're going to try to do this in as collaborative a way as possible, in a way that's as transparent as possible. And that's a perfect time for me to stop at this time and to hear any questions or concerns that you have. What I'm going to do is I am going to go to our participant list. We have more than 140 attendees, and I appreciate all of your patience. I'll ask you if you can raise your hand. That is your virtual hand online here. And I will call you in the name that I see your hand. I would just ask if you could limit your comments or your questions to a minute. We're going to do our best to get to every question we possibly can. And we thank you again for your patience and your willingness to engage with us. Dahlia Rawson, you're up first. Welcome. If you could just unmute your device.
Hi, yes. I'm Dahlia Rawson, and I'm the director of New Ballet here in San Jose. I just wanted to mention that the Office of Cultural Affairs is, of course, so important to us and to so many arts organizations in the city. I just wanted to point out that we do count on funding from the Office of Cultural Affairs, and I hope that that will not be one of the major cuts for next year. And I appreciate that there's many, many difficult decisions to be made. Thanks.
Thanks, Dahlia. And you know what? Thank you for reminding me. I should have mentioned, obviously we're seeing with sharp reductions in hotel tax. We know that some of those programs for the arts are going to be impacted. There's no question. We're going to be using some reserves to soften the blow next year in that TOT fund that is used to fund the arts. But there's no question we're going to be tightening our belt there as well. And I'll be happy to talk about that in greater detail in the days and weeks ahead, particularly as we get closer to council. Mary Helen Doherty, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for your report and the thoroughness of it. I recall that this upcoming budget, there was an in-depth discussion about the equity lens or the equity analysis that's going to be an integral part of the budget conversation. Could you comment on that and how it's integrated in the budget? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mary Helen. So there will be explicit discussion of equity, obviously in a different context. Before we were talking about it in the context of expenditure. Now we'll be talking about in the context of cutting and ensure that we're cutting in ways that is mindful of the most vulnerable members of our community, as well as where the needs are in our community, and ensuring that we are not reinforcing historic inequities that we know have existed in our city and every other city. And so, yes, there will be a lot of explicit discussion about that. And I know the city manager is taking that very seriously as well. And there'll be explicit discussion in the city manager's presentation that comes to council in the next couple of days. Dean Daly, welcome.
There, I guess that can be heard now.
Yeah, you can.
Thank you very much, Mayor, and the staff of the City of San Jose for all the initiatives you're taking, all the hard work you're doing. And obviously, you're trying to be as proactive as you can. I have one particular area of concern. I know that when I managed to download your whole budget, I was going through, and it seems that there's my perspective is that I'm a owner of a small property, and we've been directed by the City of San Jose that we cannot raise the rents. In that spirit, I would request that all compensation by the city at all levels and promotions, et cetera, be frozen also. And in that spirit, I do have one question. It is that in the near future, are there going to be any labor agreements that are going to be expiring, and any negotiations with any particular labor groups? And thank you.
Thanks, Dean. There is a hiring freeze now in the city that as to every position except for public safety is my understanding. There is one of our 13 bargaining units, that is the police union, has an expiring contract. Your points are very well taken about the fact that this is not a time in which we're going to be able to offer big pay increases. Your points are well taken and understood. Chris Burrell.
Hello there, Mayor Liccardo, and thank you for having me. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can. Thanks.
Good. I want to speak to the downtown, well, to actually all the arts, the visual and performing arts, and all my brothers and sisters, including Dahlia, who spoke a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
I feel like all of us represent a presence that generates other ancillary revenues through restaurants, parking, bars, etc. Even though right now you can't go to a restaurant or a bar. Anyway, I would only ask that you consider an investment to keep my brothers and sisters in the arts alive. And I think of the stage and theater companies and ballet company, the symphony, opera company, all of us. We all, I feel, are a very vibrant part of the core of the community and the economic well-being.
Chris, thank you. And as you were talking, I just was trying to flip to the right page in the budget. I tell you what, I'm going to come back to that issue about funding for the arts and the arts grants in particular. If you just hang on, I'll get to that after our last speaker. I just want to make sure that we've heard everyone speak first. I want to make sure I get you accurate information about that, about where the numbers are going to be, so you have a good idea what's coming. Our next speaker is Concerned Citizen.
They're about to update their Zoom.
Okay. I'm told that Henry here says if you're a concerned citizen, you have a problem. Apparently, you have an old version of the Zoom software that's not enabling you to speak on the system.
So update and then come back.
So if you can upgrade and update your Zoom software and then come on back and raise your hand, we'll get you right back in line. My apologies to you, concerned citizen, but apparently this is a feature of a glitch of the software. Becca Ross, welcome.
Hi, this is Becca Ross, and I am speaking on behalf of Teen Success Inc., which is one of the San Jose BEST program grantees. And I just wanted to ask about what your predictions are for the BEST program, which has been vital in supporting disconnected youth and high-risk and gang-impacted youth in our impoverished communities that are also correlating directly with where COVID-19 is hitting the hardest.
Yeah, thanks, Becca. There's no proposed cuts in the BEST program, and appreciate your points, and very much appreciate your work and the work of all of our BEST partners. We understand it's critically important, particularly as we try to ensure we're able to provide more opportunities for our youth. So thank you for what you're doing. Catherine Hedges, welcome.
Welcome. Yes, I'd like to echo Mary Helen's comments about viewing the cuts through an equity lens, and I'm glad to see your support up front for affordable housing, infrastructure, and public safety, as well as the opportunity programs. And I'm glad that we can, that the library cuts will be a few hours a week. I was afraid I'd hear about them only being open 1 or 2 days a week or something. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Catherine. Christine Fitzgerald, welcome. Hi, Christine. You may have to unmute yourself.
Hello, Mayor Liccardo and everybody else. I'm here speaking on behalf of SBILC and as a private citizen. My hope is that as you look at the budget, you remember those of us with disability in all aspects of determining what is funded and what is not funded. And I also would like to put out there as a private citizen that I'm very concerned with making sure that those folks with disabilities that wish to get tested that cannot get a ride through paratransit be allowed to go and get tested with help in funding the ride in some form or fashion. Thank you.
Christine, I'm sorry, could you stay on the line for a moment? Are you saying that paratransit's not being made available right now for individuals with disabilities to get to testing centers?
That is correct. According to paratransit, they will not, repeat, not help the individual get to and from the testing site. The reasoning they gave was that it's putting their drivers at risk.
Okay. So Christine, you have my email, don't you?
I do.
Yeah, could you just send me a note? And that way, that's something I can immediately forward over to our team, make sure we try to get on that right away.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. I appreciate it. It'll help me because somebody will ask, well, who is it was told who, by what, by whom? And if you could just recount whatever you heard and by whom, that would be helpful. And that way we can get to the root of this. Thank you so much, Christine.
Thank you.
Nicole Huang, welcome. And thank you for your service on our commission.
Hi, thank you for all of the effort that you've clearly put into the budget. I'd just like to know how the city would address youth-geared programs, especially the Youth Commission and its staffing, because I saw earlier in your presentation that you said you wanted to focus on improving the situation for youth as well. Thanks.
Okay, let me just ask real quickly. Hey, Jim, do you happen to have any good answers about the youth staffing?
Yeah, so the youth staffing, so there's nothing in the budget related to the youth staffing, I don't believe. I think one of the things that is in the budget, though, we are recommending, so we had been suspending on a one-time basis the late fees related to juveniles at the library.
Right.
And so as part of this budget, we make that an ongoing suspension. So so that's that's what's new about this budget. So instead of having that as a one-time suspension, that is an ongoing.
Okay. And Jim, while I got you, the TOT revenue I know is dropping sharply. In terms of our proposed budget for arts grants through the 3 separate programs we have for the arts, could you, I was just looking for the place in the budget, and I'm sorry, I know this just came out, so I'm not facile with it all yet. Do you just summarize a little bit about where we're at?
Yeah, so I think that the main source of funding that folks are talking about. So as part of our hotel tax, or our transient occupancy tax, TOT we often call it. So there's a portion that goes to the general fund that's just to help fund everything in the general fund, and then 60% of that goes to the TOT fund, which is then split in 3 ways. It helps us provide services for our convention center, our convention and visitors bureau, and to fund cultural arts programs. And so the bad news, like the mayor was saying, is that the revenues for hotel-related taxes, our TOT taxes, are going to be severely lowered, both in the current year, which we just took a hit on, and then in 2021. So it's definitely going down. I think the good news is at least part of that is going to be ameliorated a little bit, because the grants program had been setting aside a little bit of reserve funding in each year to help soften the blow that they knew would eventually come when these hotel taxes started to drop. So definitely the new allocation that for the groups in 2021 is going to be a lot lower than they had been in years past. But we're hoping to buffer some of that loss with some of the amount of funding that was set aside in reserves.
Great. I understand economic development now is part of the city manager portion of the budget. I know that's a new development, so I'm just going to try to get to that page, and hopefully I'll be able to get folks precise numbers. I know we have several folks who are interested in what's going on in the arts, so we'll get back to you on that. Bobby Gonzalez, welcome.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thanks, Bobby.
Awesome. Thank you for your presentation. I appreciate the comments on equity. And so I wanted to use my time to ask about traffic calming and Vision Zero. I really appreciated the increased investments recently in Vision Zero. And So I know sometimes, oftentimes that's funded by sources other than the general fund. So I'm just ultimately wondering if there will be any kinds of impacts to special revenue sources, or some of those vacant positions being eliminated that might affect those efforts. I think mobility is going to can potentially change in a big way with this pandemic, and so being a biker myself, and caring for pedestrians and everyone who's using the streets, I hope it's hopefully increased safety and continuing to pump money there.
Yeah, good question, Bobby. So I'm going to call on Jim Shannon again, or anybody else who wants to jump in. But I know that for many of our traffic calming investments on the capital side, we often relied on one-time funding that will be more scarce this year. Jim, can you add any detail to that?
Yes, so that's definitely true, Mayor. So we do have a couple of other sources in the traffic capital fund that helps with that. So as the mayor was pointing out, that slice of the capital funds, there's definitely resources still there. It's kind of a mixed bag. Some of the funding sources there, we have seen some several large chunks of one-time funding that will get us through for a while to help focus on some bike and pedestrian projects. There's another portion of it called our construction excise tax fund, which is we'll be taking a reduction in revenue as we go into the recession, and we probably don't have as much private development activity as we used to have. Those taxes are really related to how much construction activity is happening in the cities. As those revenues, as that activity goes down, the revenues will go down too. But it is buffered by, because it's kind of a mixed bag there. So some are up, but some are down.
Okay, thank you. Pat Waite, welcome.
Hey, Mayor, thanks for everything you're doing. I know you're working really hard to try and keep things pulled together for our city and take care of our citizens. I'm a little concerned about the drop in air travel and what the effect of that is going to be on the airport fund's ability to pay the costs and the financing of the outstanding bonds. Has that been contemplated in the general fund budget?
The short answer, good question, Pat. The short answer is no, it won't be part of the general fund budget. As you know, I know you're very sophisticated in these things, that the enterprise of the airport is a separate budget that fits within one of those special funds I talked about earlier. And I'm confident that we have the dollars to be able to finance the obligations, the bonds essentially, more than $1 billion that we spent about a decade ago to upgrade the airport. We're going to be okay this year. I know we don't have anybody from finance or the airport to jump on to correct me, so I guess I get it. I'll get to be right for today. We'll find out if I'm right tomorrow. Jim, feel free to jump in. But we have been anticipating, obviously, severe reductions in passenger counts at the airport, and we are going to be okay for this year with the existing airport revenues, plus obviously we'll be dipping into some of those reserves. Jim, you want to add anything to that?
Mayor, you're right. The only thing I would add is that as part of the CARES Act funding, the airport did receive a direct allocation of about $65 million. Yes. And that unlike the city, but the airport can use that funding for any airport purpose. And so that will also be a strategy they'll be using.
Yeah, that's a really important admission I forgot about. So yeah, that 66 million is going to be critical for us. And obviously those dollars are already in our hands. So we don't have to apply for them, they're directly allocated. So the short answer is I think we're going to be okay this year at the airport. We're going to find out in future years depending on how everything goes. Thanks for the question, Pat. David Niedermeyer, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor. You stated that in the current deregulated state, you're able to bypass a lot of the red tape to build homeless shelters in 4 weeks for what would normally take about 4 years. You also stated that these are intended to be used for 10 to 15 years based off the District 2 sites at Rue Ferrari and Monterey and Bernal. In the immediate, based off all the funds that are being used for construction versus services, how will the city ensure they can appropriate the necessary funding for critical services that are needed at these locations for the individuals that are for the entire stated usage of the 10 to 15 years?
Thanks, David. It's a good question. So there are some restricted dollars that we're relying on for many of our homeless programs, both the construction and the services. By that, I'm referring, for example, to the HAP dollars that are provided by the state. They're funding, for example, this particular project. And we contemplated that some of those HAP funds should be set aside to provide the services at those sites, everything from on-site management to security and other services. And so for the next several years, we've got some money set aside. It's also the case that we passed Measure E in March, which is providing dollars that have to be dedicated to either services or housing for the homeless and other affordable housing needs, specifically for construction. So that is another ongoing dedicated source, obviously to the extent that the council keeps its commitment to the voters. And then there are other federal sources, for example, like CDBG, community development block grants and others that are restricted for particular uses, and recipients have to be particular income groups. And so again, it tends to be those dedicated dollars that we're able to use to fund the services at projects and developments that we're building. So in addition, obviously, we rely on the county typically with most permanent affordable housing developments to come in and provide services like if there's a need for alcohol or drug rehabilitation or job training, other mental health, other kinds of services like that. And that's a county provided service. So important question to be sure. I think we're going to be fine in the foreseeable future. By that, I mean the next 2 to 3 years. Obviously, the depth of this very serious recession, I think we should probably call it depression by now, since we're talking about 20 to 25% unemployment. Obviously, that could change a lot of things, but at least from where we are today, I think we're in good shape for the next 2 to 3 years. Okay, Tom Trudell, welcome. Hi, Tom. I think you have to unmute your device. We're not able to hear you right now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Question regarding, I'm with the Friends of the Almaden Library. I've just got a question regarding, can you get any guesstimations as to when the library may be reopening after the shelter in place? And what kind of COVID mitigations will there be, if any? Or what is the timeline? Or I haven't heard anything.
Great question. I know, Jill Bourne, you're on the line, aren't you?
I am.
Do you have any insights?
Yeah. Hi, Tom. How are you?
Okay.
Yeah, we are working on a phased-in approach that mirrors the city's phases to recover from the current emergency. And we are definitely looking at a modified service plan that we've actually built into the budget that would take us probably 3 to 6 months. If we're able to get to full services by then, we're thinking everything from being able to institute as soon as possible some level of materials pickup for our patrons, but definitely needing to modify crowds and make sure that staff and the public are safe.
Okay, so that's all to be determined based on when we can get out of our houses, and you guys can, you said 6 months to get it all prepared? Or?
Well, so what I meant was, sorry, I talk kind of fast, as you know. As the city begins to reopen, we think that we'll be able to provide some services sooner than others. And then we are going to take up to 6 months to phase in all of the different types of services that we provide, as long as we can do them safely. But I would, especially as a commissioner, you can look to be notified very soon about some services that we're hopeful to start as soon as we are ensured that we have enough personal protective equipment for our staff.
Okay, great. I forgot for a moment there that I was also a commissioner. I just had our Friends of the Library meeting yesterday. Yes, so I'll change the hat to a commissioner hat. Thank you very much.
And Tom, I know that wasn't a satisfying answer because there's no defined date, and I'll give you an even less satisfying answer, which is we're really, as you know, subject to the orders of the public health authorities in the county. And so everything we're doing is really based on what's going on, obviously, with the extent of contagion in our region, and how we're able to ramp up testing, contact tracing, all those things, and then ultimately when those orders are going to change. And so we're just not able to give very good estimates because, as you probably know, they're not all that sure exactly how quickly they're going to be able to reopen. And so we're just going to have to give very unsatisfying answers until we have a clear picture of when the rules are going to change.
Well, this might be a micro question, but how are you going to mitigate any COVID possible infections on books? I mean, obviously, when you locked up the library, hopefully there wasn't any there, but I mean, how can you make the public feel safe?
It's not a micro question for us in the library. So actually, there have been a lot of studies being done nationally in the library community around understanding what the potential dangers are and how to mitigate them. And so there's been a lot of work about understanding what treatments we might have to do going forward. And as you know, we've enhanced our online resources as well, and our ebook checkout is through the roof, but we definitely want to get our materials back to the community. So we will be implementing everything that we need to ensure that our materials are clean and safe.
Great, thank you.
And Tom, of course, I'm not an epidemiologist, but the good news is that at least most of the studies I've seen suggest that the viral loads on surfaces are such that it's very unlikely that people typically, that transmission will happen through contact with a surface that has been untouched for days or weeks. It's just very unlikely, but obviously transmission tends to happen person to person. But obviously we're going to know more in the weeks and months ahead, and we're going to follow the directions of our public health authorities.
Yeah, the collections that are in the buildings have not been touched for weeks, so we know they're fine. It's more about ensuring that people feel comfortable checking out new materials if it's just been returned. And so there are strategies for handling that.
Well, I'm sure you'll be working with the Friends of the Library groups. Obviously, the Friends of the Library are not making any money from sales for the foreseeable future, so that impacts their bottom line. And so just speaking for Almaden, we'll be cutting back severely on our budget.
Yeah.
And this was discussed with the Almaden branch yesterday. So I appreciate all the stuff you're doing and trying to keep us all safe.
Thanks, Tom. Tobin Gilman, welcome.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, thanks, Tobin.
Hi, thank you for hosting this. My question is, will the city's pension fund obligations factor into the general fund cuts? And if so, what might that look like?
Yeah, here's what we know, Tobin. You probably know that the way we calculate what our contribution is, it's actually not us who does the calculating. It's the retirement boards have an actuary who does the calculating. And it's based on historical data. And basically, it's year-old data based on the returns of the plan from the prior year, and then plus all the demographic assumptions that go into how long they expect people to live, for example, how much medical care they're going to need, all those things, right? Whether you're talking about pensions or retiree medical benefits. So what we've seen with COVID is not going to affect this year's calculations of our obligations to the funds. They will increase somewhat, not enormously, but well within what we had all projected. What we're likely to see is the following years, for the next half decade or so, over a period of 5 years, which is typically the time in which the actuaries smooth out losses. For 5 years, you're going to see us having to absorb the additional costs that come with steep reductions in returns in those pension plans. And I expect the market will be poor for many months to come. At some point, of course, it will rebound, and we all hope it'll rebound strongly, but I'm not holding my breath. So I expect for several years starting next year, that is starting the 2021-22 fiscal year, is where we're going to see sharply higher pension and retiree healthcare obligation payments.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Tobin. Justin Mamura, welcome.
Hey, Mayor, this is Justin with the Trash Punks. As you know, as you know, Well, actually, I should first say we've got a ton of volunteers who cannot wait to clean up San Jose.
Amen. Thank you, Justin.
Yeah, of course. I just wanted to check to see if the anti-litter and anti-graffiti program are going to be reduced due to the new budget.
Great question. Let me ask either John Cicerelli or Jim Shannon if either could respond, Justin. That's an important one.
Hi, Mayor. I can respond. John Cicerelli, Director of PRNS. In this first wave, it will not be impacted. However, if we get to a tier 2, it would be impacted, and that would be later in the fall. And I think the mayor can probably talk a little about the 2-tier plan or the 2-package plan. But in the immediate near future, no changes.
Yeah.
All right. That's good to know. I just wanted to encourage you. We need to keep our streets clean. And as you know, we have so many volunteers that just want to help and beautify San Jose. And we just encourage you just to keep those programs going because we want to see clean streets, as I know you do too.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Justin, thank you, first of all, for the many, many, many hours that you've invested with a lot of volunteers in keeping our city clean, and also your service with the city as well. And I still got my Trash Punks hat. I want you to know my wife let me wear it yesterday, so it was good. I'm going to do everything I can to fight to ensure that we keep those programs going, because we really want to leverage all that volunteer energy for the benefit of our community. And certainly we know we've got a real challenge with trash in our city. So certainly my commitment, I'll be pushing. But yeah, we've got one set of cuts that we're considering in this next month. And then obviously, if the economic indicators look worse, we'll be coming back in September and discussing that second round. What John suggested was that the city manager's proposed cuts in September, if we have to get to those, would include those programs. And that's where obviously we're going to have much harder conversations. Thanks, Justin.
You got it. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mayor.
All right. Take care of yourself. Anurag Mishra, welcome. Anurag, I think you're on mute. Anurag, we're still not hearing you. If you could unmute yourself. Software? No. Okay. Anurag, we're not able to hear you at this time. If you're having a challenge unmuting your device, we can come back to you. I'm just going to call on our next speaker right now and maybe ask to come right back to you. If you could keep your hand up and see if you can work on that device so you can, hopefully it'll be unmuted properly. Molly, welcome.
Thank you very much. This is Molly McLeod, and my focus is on the disability community and the intersection with racism when we're looking at equity. When I consider from the 2017 flood to the PG&E shutoffs, such tremendous improvement in terms of communication in Vietnamese and Spanish. However, it's only been very recently that social media has included alt text. This fabulous conversation and the information is not available through the Communication Access Real-Time CART. So the investments that are being made now they don't fully include the folks that have the best information and are the most impacted, like Chris Fitzgerald mentioned as a power chair user about the transportation. She also serves on the Human Rights Commission and was serving in the EOC as I was in the access and functional needs. So please spend more in that area. Thanks.
Hey, Molly, just to be clear, could you repeat again the name of the system you thought was effective but not utilizing the best information?
On this Zoom, you don't have the CART, Communication Access Real-Time.
Okay, CART.
So the description of what's going on. And it's an issue under the ADA in terms of the government allowing all residents to participate to gain access to the information. So all the fabulous answers that you're pulling out, folks don't have an opportunity to learn from that and then participate. So I'll follow up also with an email and some links
thank
about
you, Molly.
that.
So it's CART, CART, And
It stands for Communication Access Real Time. And this is just a great opportunity with Zoom and other things. We're going to be able to innovate. It's going to be wonderful.
yeah, okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate that information. And let me see if I can get on top of it and learn a bit about what's available. Thank you for bringing that to our attention. Jim Shannon had an update on cultural grants. I think I just pulled up the page. And Jim, I think I see in the budget on page 7-69, it looks like cultural grants will go from 11.6 million to 6.2 million or 6.3 million in proposed budget. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that's true. What I'm looking at, Mayor, is I found the source and use statement for the transient occupancy tax,
Yeah.
which is where you could see that specific dollar amount for. And so it's a little bit trickier there. So the one for cultural grants, it would be $3.7 million, which would be the allocation this year for cultural grants. Now, just to compare that for what it was last year, we had our allocation of 6.3 million. So a pretty significant drop this year.
Oh, I see.
So that's, when you kind of look at some of the budget document, we kind of roll over some unused funding from year to year. So I just wanted to give you what the base allocation is per formula in the city's municipal code about how we allocate those TOT dollars. And so for cultural grants.
Jim, you just cut out.
Sorry, for those cultural grants, it would have been a 6.3 million as our base allocation last year. This year,
Okay.
because of the drop in TOT, it's going to be about 3.4 million. And I did want to correct one thing I said earlier, Mayor, was when we had to solve that hole for 1920, that was when we used most of the reserves we had set aside for cultural grant programming.
I see.
The current. So I want to just.
So we can't use the reserves in the next year.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is in response to two of our community members who spoke about arts early on. So what we heard clearly was the grant program for the competitive grant program will be going from 6.3 million this year to 3.7 million next. And Jim, maybe you can take this offline and we can talk later, but if you look at Roman numeral 7-69, it describes the line item for cultural grants generally. And there are much larger numbers there. It goes from 11.6 million to 6.3. I am assuming that's because there may be perhaps the permanent grants that go, for example, to our downtown arts organizations and the Mexican Heritage Plaza and others may be mixed in that somehow.
Right,
but
right. It's a bigger pool of funding.
that's why it's a bigger number. Okay, so the competitive grant pool will be 3.7 million in the coming year.
Right.
All right, so a significant reduction to be sure, but we're going to do everything we can to try to help many of our struggling arts organizations get through this tough time. Thad, welcome.
Hi, it's Commissioner Ade from the LEEC. Hi, Jill. How are you? First off, I'd like to say thank you for making permanent the removal of youth fines through the library. I think that's one of the most important things we pushed through in the last couple of years on the commission. But my question is more to do with how proactive the city will be in ensuring that employees of private employers are being kept safe during the reopening. How proactive will the city be in doing spot checks to ensure employers are taking and making sure that the appropriate safety considerations are in place? That's my question. Thank you.
That by employers, you're referring to private sector employers?
I'm specifically referring to private sector employers who, as we open them up, you know, if they're not being safe, that blood is on, you know, the government's hands for allowing it to happen.
Yeah. I mean, I'm happy to ask Heather Randall or anyone else who wants to respond. Let me just offer this. You know, bluntly, we don't have the staffing to be policing every employment site.
Of course.
And so we're probably going to be responding on a complaint-based system and relying on a complaint-based system and trying to get information out to workers so that they can call if they feel that they're working in an unsafe workplace, then we can respond. But if Chief Randall has any insights or observations she wants to offer.
Right, thank you, Mayor. We are doing our best to address those concerns. We did for a while have compliance cards out responding to those types of complaints, but we're no longer doing compliance cards now, but certainly if somebody feels there's an unsafe situation, then we will take the call in, and when we have the resources, and we can go by. But for the most part, we're working on an education type of approach. But we do want to address concerns that the community might have, and we'll do so when we have the resources available.
Okay, so the short answer is the city doesn't have the resources to police safety.
I'm sorry, repeat that one more time.
Yeah. So the short answer is that at the moment, the city doesn't have the resources to do the spot checks to ensure safety. So it's going to be a reactive instead of proactive situation.
Right. Our main concern right now is to address public safety issues, and we do have to prioritize the calls that we respond to. We have to take those as they come in and assess what resources we have at the moment, and we'll address those and really just evaluate them based on the information we receive and what resources we have at that given time.
Of course. So I assume part of the plan is balancing city resources versus how many employees are allowed to return to work.
Yeah, let me try to clarify here. First, who's able to return to work and how many? That's really going to be up to the county and the county public authorities. And our job is to enforce as best as we can within the limitations we've got. I think you probably heard our police chief was pretty emphatic. I think it was a couple of days ago when he was asked about enforcing, parades or whatever, and he was saying, look, the primary role of the police department is protect public safety, and particularly against predatory crime. And right now we've got a system where folks are being arrested and then being able to be released without any bail over to the county jail. And we don't have any control over that. We wish they weren't being released, but that's what's going on. And so the police department is more stressed than ever trying to respond to those primary public safety concerns.
Sorry, I'm not actually concerned with the police. They're doing a great job. Thank you very much for your work. I'm more worried about the health inspectors and that side of things, because the clear and present danger to the public right now is private employers not taking the safety precautions necessary to keep the pandemic at bay.
I just can only say this much, Dad. This is not going to be satisfying as an answer, but we are only going to be as safe as we are all willing to be. And by that, I mean, it's on each one of us. This is a community responsibility, and it's going to be on each one of us. And the hope is that as people observe other folks who are not being safe, if employers are not providing a safe workplace, then there'll be some ability. Obviously, we're going to do everything we can to ensure people have a phone number to call. Obviously, the district attorney is out there enforcing and prosecuting in cases where folks are willfully not complying with the county order.
All right. Thank you very much for your.
Concerned citizen? Still a problem with the software? Okay. Concerned citizen, Henry is seeing through here that you still seem to have the software that's not going to allow you he doesn't allow him to unmute you. So essentially you need to download the latest, re-download the latest Zoom app so that you can have updated software to be able to communicate with us. I'm sorry about that. Tran, welcome. Welcome, Tran. Tran, you may need to unmute yourself. We're not able to hear you yet.
Thank you, Mayor. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Mayor, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine. Welcome.
Okay, given the budget constraint that we have, can you elaborate on what have your team done to make sure that the tiny home projects are most cost effective? I'm pretty sure you have read an article indicating that tiny home projects are luxury homes on a per square foot, and will encourage more homeless coming to the cities of San Jose. really appreciate it if you can give us some more color on this. Thank you.
Tran, could you help me understand? You said that there are articles saying that the tiny homes are luxury homes?
I'm sorry, Mayor, can you repeat, please?
Yeah, you said something about tiny homes being costly luxury homes of some kind. Is that right?
Yeah, I was just saying that there was an article that's explaining the tiny home projects are really luxury home based on $1 per square foot calculation.
Okay.
So I just want to know, what have your team done to make sure that these tiny home projects are most cost effective? As far as I know, I mean, the right way to build these things are built up. It's the cheapest way to build, and it's in the city, not building out, even though you can get the land for free. So yeah, really appreciate if you can give us some color on this.
Yeah, let me tell you about a couple of different projects that are going on and give some context. The tiny home projects, the two that are under, one just finished construction on Mayberry Road, east of 101 near the BART site. And then another one's under construction at 280 and 101. And I know a little bit about the construction of these sites because I was out there helping to build them with Habitat for Humanity along with my wife. And the units themselves are not expensive to build. They're typically about $8,000 or $9,000 per unit because, of course, relying on volunteer labor. But the Habitat for Humanity, a lot of donated materials as well, and Habitat does a great job. And so $8,000 or $9,000 for a unit is obviously an extraordinary bargain in this community. Obviously, these are small units. They're very simple. It's basically a bed, a heater, electrical outlet, a small desk, a light. It's very, very simple living. And then they have communal facilities for showers and for kitchens and so forth. That model, I mentioned that was maybe $8,000 per unit, is much more expensive when you include obviously the cost of building out the infrastructure, because you have to have sewer and electrical and water and all those things go to the site. So it all depends on what site you pick and how far it is from the local or the nearest sewer line or water line. Obviously, that stuff is expensive. Still, even at that cost, it is by no stretch luxury level cost. In other words, it's still a bargain by a huge margin. And I think the amount we spent was quite a bit less than $2 million for the 40 units we built at Mayberry Road. And I think part of that also went to buy some of the land over at the site on 280, not for the land, but rather some of the utilities at 280 and 101. So if you do the math, what you come up with is something like a $50,000 a unit calculation, which again would be a huge bargain by any stretch, by any calculation. What we're building now on the 3 sites that have been in the news lately is actually not tiny homes. It's prefab modular housing, prefabricated housing, where we're paying typically about $25,000, $30,000 a unit for those modular construction. Now that just counts the sort of the dorm room itself, which is typically attached to many other dorm rooms. They put it on a flatbed truck. Each one has a bathroom attached to each dorm room. And then we lay it down. You still obviously got to pay for infrastructure and so forth. So that may drive your costs up again to $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a unit. That is, again, a huge bargain because I think, as you know, if you try to build an apartment building today, what you are going to pay to build that apartment building with labor, land, and everything else is going to be in excess of $700,000 per unit. So if anybody's telling you this is luxury cost housing, I don't think they're looking very objectively at the data. So happy to talk to whoever that might be, and we can provide you and them lots more information about the cost. It's all very public. Ava Smith-Glenn, welcome.
Hi there, Mayor. Thank you for taking.
Hi, welcome.
My name is Ava Smith-Glenn, and I'm with San Jose Arts Advocates, the School of Visual Philosophy, and Flash Fiction Forum, all native San Jose organizations. And first of all, I want to thank you for your leadership, Mayor. It's great to have someone like you in office, helping our great city recover or get through this time.
Thank you.
I know that you've already addressed some of our concerns regarding, well, not addressed our concerns, but have explained some issues regarding funding for the arts. I'm simply concerned that the grant money towards the arts are going to be cut anywhere from 45 to 57%. And I hope that you will consider the artists as second responders to rebuilding our great city. And I would like to see some innovative solutions to improving the grant monies devoted to art organizations. Thank you, Mayor, and please don't forget the artists, okay?
Thank you, and thank you for your work. First, I love the expression second responders. That's great. I'm going to borrow that. So I appreciate the call for creative solutions, and I'm very open to your creative solutions and those of others in the arts community. We have only an uncreative solution at this point, which is when we don't have enough revenue, we cut. And in this case, the source of revenue for these grants, as you know, was the hotel tax dollars, and those have dramatically dropped. And if we were to try to find ways to supplement those hotel tax dollars, the general fund, it would mean we'd be cutting some other basic service, libraries, police, fire, any of the other things that we all treasure and value. So all of these are very important. And so the short answer is no, I don't have a creative solution, but I'm very open to any of yours. So by all means, let's continue the conversation. Patricia Mendoza.
Hi, Mayor. Thank you so much for the information today, the transparency provided. I want to briefly remind everyone that unfortunately low-income families will be hit the most again. We rely heavily on many of the services that will be affected with this budget. I'm glad to hear libraries will be impacted minimally, but want to make sure that it's clear how essential the Beautify SJ grants are to our neighborhood associations and parks. I'm concerned because you mentioned that the program will be scaled back. And so unfortunately, like I mentioned, the neighborhoods that need the most support will be left without it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Patricia. Let me address that point for a moment. My recollection, Jim, was last year we had some additional money. We supplemented the Beautify SJ grant program with one-time funds. And what we're pulling back is that one-time money. Is that right, Jim?
Correct. Yeah, we're pulling back the one-time money, but we are still having some one-time funding, just not quite as much.
Okay, so the base funding then for the Beautify SJ grants, do you recall what that is?
I don't at the moment, but let me just give me a second and I will be able to.
Okay, we'll give Jim a chance to hunt through the binders. Thank you. I know that's important to a lot of neighborhoods. We appreciate it. Tina Morrill, great to hear from you. Welcome. Tina, I think you might be on mute. There you go.
Hi, Mayor Sam. Thank you. So I have a question and a comment. My question is, has the city confirmed that the county is going to continue to provide the services that are going to be needed for this emergency housing, for example, for the tiny homes?
Yeah, and if you're referring to the tiny homes.
Well, I mean, you know, the supportive housing or any kind of housing where the city is relying on county services. Have you confirmed with the county?
Yeah.
Thank you for letting me.
So Tina, important question, I know, and I'm not going to give you a very satisfactory answer, but here's what I think I know. That is that the county has certainly made commitments to fund supportive services. But like the city, the county can't bind future boards of supervisors, just like we can't bind future council members saying thou shalt spend money here or thou shalt spend money there. So in future years, in other words, all we can do is bind ourselves to spend what we have in this year. So we believe, based on our historical relationship with the county, that they'll make good on their commitment. Obviously, the world can change, and we know this is going to be a very severe time. So we don't know anything for certain. But what we know is that the county has traditionally kept its word when they said they'd provide the service. And the good news is some of the funding streams, like the Section 8 voucher program, provide ongoing revenue sources that then the affordable housing management and developers can, not the developers, but rather the folks who are managing the affordable housing development can use those revenues to provide services. So again, that's not the ironclad commitment that I think you're looking for. but it's what we have right now in this time of great uncertainty. Brennan Rawson, welcome, sir.
There we go. Good evening, Mayor. Thanks for taking the question. I just wanted to build on the comments a little bit earlier, but tie it to related to really the restaurants and hospitality and leisure sections for a lot for downtown. It's like 94% of the jobs that were lost in the first month of the impact of the COVID crisis was in the leisure and hospitality sector, and that's according to the EDD. And we all expect that to be the last sector that really comes back online.
Yeah.
And that's a big part. That sector provides a lot also related to sales tax for the city. And so it's in terms of it all relates back to the resources that we have to work with. But one item we do know is that the arts certainly have a very direct and significant multiplier with those other service sectors of the economy. And it just seems to make a lot of sense of needing to focus on this part of our community life, and sort of come up with a plan that makes sense to see that whole sector come back. And what doesn't make sense is, when you're looking at that, 50 some odd % reduction to cultural grants programs, each of the other sectors, the amount of the TOT that's going to the general fund, or the amount of the TOT that's going to the convention center, or the Con-Viz Bureau, none of those see that kind of level of cut. And so it's hard to reconcile that. So.
Yeah, fair point. Brendan, you raise an important point, because I'm looking right now at the budget page Roman numeral 7-69. This is the department budget summary. And it does appear as though cultural facilities operations and maintenance is sustained, and in fact increases somewhat. Is that because of the use of some of those facilities to house homeless individuals? Or is there some other explanation of why? Because we would expect, actually, I'm sorry, that's the facilities operations. That's not the same as the convention center, is it?
It's not. And maybe I could try a stab at this, because I think what the caller may be pointing to. So, Mayor, actually, the page that you're looking at there, I think the Arts and Cultural Development Administration, that $6.87 million number, that includes both the amount for cultural grants and the amount for the administration of the city's overall cultural grant program, which also includes some staffing costs. I think what the caller may be looking at is, if you're looking at the TOT fund, which is the fund where we see that slice of the special tax,
right?
That's on page Roman numeral 9-98. And what looks really concerning probably to the arts folks is that when you look to see what the 1920 adopted number was for cultural grants was 8.9 million. Then you look and see what the amount is for the 2021 budget, and it goes way down to 3.6 million. And then if you look at what the other folks in that fund do, their drop doesn't look to be as big. And just the thing I want to point out to folks is that all of those allocations are by formula. I think the reason why it looks the difference looks so big for cultural arts is because we rebudget funding, or we carry over any unused funding in cultural grants. We carry that over to the following year. So that's part of the buildup there, is that their 1920 adopted budget number includes some previous year's allocations, along with the reserve that was set aside, which is about $3 million to buffer the 1920 loss. So it looks like the impact is disproportionate amongst the partners there, but it's just kind of the technical portion of the budget, but everybody got the same reduction of their allocation.
Okay. And just that Convention and Visitors Bureau funding allocation, the 5.69 million, Jim, it may be worthy of some public discussion. I know obviously Team San Jose has taken some very hard hits, and they've had layoffs as a result in the last few weeks. But obviously they're not going to have a lot of business in the next few months. And I'm wondering if it makes sense if any of those dollars could be reallocated. And we could have more public conversations about that, but it seems like there may be some opportunity there. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but I'd like to understand better where those dollars are going.
Definitely, I think we should have that conversation. I think the other thing that we'll just point out is that the allocation is into the municipal code of how those are split out, but we can certainly have the discussion.
Right, so the council could change it any given Tuesday, but
exactly,
the council can't come from you guys.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, we'll certainly have more to talk about, as we always do in every budget season, particularly in tough budget seasons like this one. Dietra Wang, welcome.
Hi, thank you for the effort you put into the budget. I wanted to know if the city has any other strategies to create revenue.
Great question. I don't want to cut you off, though. Did you have any other questions before I jump in with an answer?
Do they plan on selling city cars? You plan on selling city cars?
Yeah. Thank you, Dietra. So the best plan for generating city revenue is to bring employers into town because they pay lots of tax revenue and they tend not to need much in city services. And the way that municipal finance has long worked in this state is that residents, although we love them, they tend to consume a lot of city services, that is police, fire, and parks, and all the things that we know residents need and deserve. But the tax revenue that residents pay overwhelmingly goes to other agencies, primarily county, the schools in the state, whereas the city revenues generally tend to come from employers and business. And so to the extent that we're able to grow jobs in our downtown and bring companies in, and that is what is the best way to create revenue and obviously create job opportunities for our residents. Now, obviously, the whole economy is on hold in a big way, and I guess on hold is a nice way of putting it. It's really fallen off a cliff. So my mandate is try to figure out every way we possibly can where there is interest of employers in moving in. In fact, I was just talking to a CEO 2 days ago who was interested in expanding in San Jose, despite the downturn. God love them for doing it, and trying to do everything we can to either get out of the way or encourage them to come. We don't offer subsidies. We don't give them money or anything. We just want to make sure we're able to move at the speed they need us to move, get the permits on time, and be able to get their tenant improvements done on their buildings, and ensure that they have a clear picture of what the fees are going to be. All those things are important so we can move quickly with businesses as they move. And then obviously there are some big development projects proposed that would also create a lot of revenue because the projects themselves, when they get built, they pay a lot more in property tax than an empty parking lot will, because now you've got an assessed value for a high rise that may be worth $200 million instead of a $2 million parking lot. So the tax revenue we're able to generate goes up by 100-fold, right? And that's really, really important. So we're talking a lot to those folks who are developing to say, hey, what can we do to make sure you keep building? And certainly the Google project is a really important one for our city, I think, as many recognize. So is another project over on Park Avenue, which the developer there is Jay Paul, wants to build about 5 million square feet of office right in the core of our downtown where we should be building that. And I want to do everything we can to get those projects built, both because they provide immediate revenue through construction taxes, they provide long-term revenue through the property taxes, and they bring jobs to the community, and those jobs, in fact, generate more revenue. So for all those reasons, that's the best way we can generate revenue. We have engaged in some creative agreements, such as the one I mentioned with eBay, where they've agreed that they'll identify San Jose as the locus point for what they call the use tax, the transactions in which people are buying products on eBay online, and San Jose can benefit from those transactions. That's a very unique arrangement that Nancy Klein and some smart people in our office at Economic Development worked out. That's going to enable us to be able to save about $20 million in cuts this next year because of the revenues that will generate. So that's another way we're able to create revenue. But as you can imagine, for a city, there's not a lot of super creative ways other than raising taxes and fees, which are exactly the things that people don't want to hear about, last I checked. So we've raised taxes plenty during the time I've been mayor, and I'm not eager to raise them during a time when people are hurting as much as they are now. This isn't the time for us to do that. So we'll be focusing on the more palatable ways to generate more revenues. Thank you for the question. Jason Sue, and thank you for your work at the Guadalupe River Park.
Hi, Mayor. Thank you for that. And I just want to first acknowledge the difficult work you and the city are doing both in responding to this pandemic and the management afterwards. My question is actually about your reference to a second round budget revision in September. I know this session is focused on the budget, but I'm curious how you're watching the forecast to strategize future cost reductions, and also referencing the question before, any particular partnerships with nonprofits and private sector to kind of maximize the dollar impact. The Conservancy is definitely willing to kind of step in and to help with creative solutions with the city. But I wanted to kind of see if that strategy is baked into it. And I just want to thank you, your team, and John Cicerelli from PRNS for your leadership.
Hey, Jason, thank you for the question. Jason, can you repeat what you said before you said, the question about creative partnerships with nonprofits and private sector? There was something right before that I didn't quite get.
Yeah. So one is, how are you watching the forecast to decide whether you need a second revision in September?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Got it. I'll let Jim Shannon weigh in with all the technical information that he knows far better than I do, Jason. But I would just say, I think the most important determinant of all is how quickly can we reopen this economy. And as you know, it's not a toggle switch, it's a dimmer, and it's going to be staged, and it's going to take time. And that's going to determine everything in terms of our ability to generate revenues, because we depend on the economy to do that. So we're going to learn a lot as we look at sales tax revenue returns from the state in the coming months. But ultimately, it's all going to be dictated by what's going on with the public health authorities in our county, in our region, in our state. Jim, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. One of the key indicators is going to be for us will be for the sales tax revenue that we are supposed to get in April, May, and June. We actually don't know how well we did or how poorly we did until the end of August. So at the end of August, we're going to get that data for how we ended the year with sales tax, and that will help drive a lot of our decision making. That, along with what the mayor said, is how we are doing with unemployment, how businesses are open. So how bad was last year really? And then how are things tracking in the first couple of months of the fiscal year?
Great. I have one more person who has their hand raised. If you wanted to speak, please raise your hand now. And
Mayor, actually, can I jump in and answer that?
Yeah, Jim, please.
Yeah, there's the question. The Parks Director reminded me I didn't answer the Beautify SJ grants question. So we have, for that, we have an ongoing allocation for Beautify SJ grants of $100,000. That's still in our budget, so we still have that.
Okay.
Last year, we added an extra $200,000 one time for a total of $300,000. This year, we're only able to kick in another $100,000. So it would be a $200,000 total this year.
Okay, well then at least it's better than it was a couple of years ago. It just won't be quite as good as last year, I guess. All right, that's heartening news. Thank you, Jim. Okay, I see someone with the caption E7S. E7S. Welcome.
Hey, Mayor Sam Liccardo. This is Juan Carlos Araujo from Empire 7 Studios.
Oh, I should have known. Empire 7. Hey, Juan Carlos, how are you?
Your neighbor.
Yes,
hey,
sir.
Just really tuning in here. Thank you guys for the City of San Jose for the initiatives, especially with the mini home project in Southside San Jose. Really, our hats off to Sergio Jimenez on those efforts as well, along with the whole city council who supported the project. Just wanted to sort of speak on our behalf as small arts entities. And yes, arts is very important. During the shelter in place, we have noticed a tremendous amount of people engaging and actually being able to get out of their homes and enjoy a little bit of public art. So to sort of second on someone's comment here that, art is sort of a second response. I've been doing my best to stay in touch with as many community meetings, but I did also want to sort of ask a question in terms of if anything has changed for the 1% for the arts in the private sector for development. And then also on a separate note, just seeing about not knowing when everybody can get back to work, when we get back to normal. What is the policy or policies changing or sort of the leeway that we get as performers, possibly maybe taking onto the streets. I've seen in other countries too, where they're really, New York City just put out a campaign out there where their subways were doing a full-on cleaning of their subway stations and all that. And I just think that seeing that kind of momentum and sort of creating that kind of advocacy throughout our city will sort of encourage us as citizens to not forget that we have to practice these new safety normals and be proactive about making sure that we're inspiring the next generations to be aware and contribute as much as we can, by cleaning our bike stations and things like that. So yeah, that's all. I just thank you all for your time. Appreciate it.
Juan Carlos, thank you. And thanks for what you're doing and have been doing for many years, Empire 7 and throughout our arts community. Let me first answer the question about the 1% for arts and development. I know Councilman Carrasco has been a strong advocate of that. That did not get selected by the council as one of its priorities in the last priority setting session. So I think that means that it's not going to be enacted this year, though I know it's something we're still considering. To be honest with you, it probably wouldn't help much for a while anyway, because given the downturn, but obviously it's something we should be looking at for our revival, and certainly open to doing the show. With regard to activation of streets and use of public space for artists, I think this really fits into the proposal that Councilmember Davis and I introduced last week. Gosh, all the times running together. Last week, called San Jose Al Fresco. We're cognizant of the fact for a lot of small businesses, including arts-focused creative businesses, that they have small amount of space, and any public health order that enables them to open at all is going to be very tough on small businesses, because you're just not going to they're not going to enable you to have a significant density of any kind of people inside a small space, whether that's a black box theater production space or a yoga studio or a restaurant. And so we need to think more creatively about how we use outdoor space. And obviously there are real limitations to that. I mean, the good news is we have 300 days of sun a year, but the bad news is sometimes it rains. And so probably we're going to having a lot of folks investing in tents and other things. But there's no question that even if it's not public space, maybe it's private, for example, parking lots, where we could make room to bring commerce and art outdoors. This is really our opportunity to do that. This is the moment of crisis where we can say, is there a way for us to think differently about how we come out of this crisis a better city than we went in? And certainly we have not taken advantage of our public outdoor space enough in this city, given, we don't bat our weight given the extraordinary the weather that we enjoy here, and the fact that we do have a wonderful art scene and a vibrant culture that should be expressed more outside. So this may be our opportunity. So I guess what I'd say, Juan Carlos, is please engage with us in this San Jose Al Fresco effort. Kim Walesh and Blagi Zalalich, I think a lot of the folks on the team who at Economic Development who will be leading this effort. And we want to engage with small businesses, and yes, with cultural organizations as well, to see if there are ways that we can bring all this activity outdoor in a way that is both safe and obviously enhancing to the community. So thanks for the good question. All right, I think I saw Angie Halstrup Alvarez, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, Angie, welcome.
Hi, Mayor. Thank you so much for having these really open dialogues and conversations with us. And also just thank you for your leadership during these really challenging times.
Thank you, Angie.
And, you've heard a lot of us in the arts speak tonight, and just really also want to underscore that there's tremendous needs in our community right now. And I think so many of us here in the arts really are working in solidarity with our working class neighbors, our immigrant community, and those who are also undocumented. And so just really think broadly and creatively about how we can be a resource and perhaps other areas of work that you're doing. So I think it was great hearing that, you're open to seeing how can we minimize cuts in the arts and find other revenue potentially to support it, and just know that we're really here to be a partner to bring our city back and make it a great place to live, work, and play. So thank you.
Thank you, Angie, and thank you for everything you do at MACLA. It's a great organization. Jean Ann, welcome.
Hi, Mr. Mayor.
Hi, Jean.
I'm noticing that our parks appear to have done pretty well in the tier 1 cuts. They've been serving us very well as far as being pressure relief for our population as it's been sheltering in place, and likely they will continue to need to do that. Looking ahead, though, I notice, or that at least I remember from the March budget message, you recommended paying off the Los Lagos golf debt, and it seems that that's still in the budget right now. And I'm wondering if that strategy is so appropriate, because those are general fund dollars that might be more useful, and there's not so much of a pressure to get somebody to bid on operating that business at a profit, as I think was the reason for the original strategy. So I'm wondering about that. And I'm also wondering if there are plans in place to do like was done in a 2008 recession, where funds were borrowed from the Park Trust Fund in order to close the budget gap. And there was also refinancing of a lot of facilities, community centers, and the like, in order to draw some cash out to operate. And I'm wondering if those are some of the strategies that we'll be seeing out there in tier 2 and tier 3.
Hey, Gene, remind me, you're talking about the Park Trust Fund. Is that what happened in Spartan Keys? I think it was $2 million with the redevelopment agency? Are you referring to something else?
My understanding was that it was borrowed out of the big fund and used in order to close a budget gap. And it was eventually paid back year by year at a few $100,000 a year.
Yeah.
But at the level how those CPAs actually do it, that's beyond my pay grade.
Okay. I'm not going to venture into that one because, I'm honest with you, I was pretty sure that those were legally restricted under the Quimby Act. But what I will, let's talk a little bit about Los Lagos. And Jim Shannon, if you could help a little here. My understanding was that the financing cost for the Los Lagos debt was paid out of the general fund. Is that right?
Right. So the golf courses are subsidized by the general fund, and so a lot of that is related to the debt that a couple of those golf courses had. So last year we paid off the debt for Rancho, and what's in this year's budget pays off the outstanding debt related to Los Lagos, and so that gives us an annual general fund savings of about $1.3 million. Mayor, you went on mute, Mayor.
I did. I'm sorry. I was just trying to transition to their phone call listeners. Thank you, Jim. I appreciate that. I realize 4 people have been waiting on the phone for us, and I want to apologize to them because we've had some difficulty in pulling them up. So, Gene, I guess as you heard from the response, this is an opportunity for us to pay down debt to be able to save the ongoing burden, and then obviously give us flexibility for whatever we might be able to do that obviously has a recreational use, presumably golf at that site. Though certainly you've probably heard me express on more than one occasion that I think we should be thinking creatively about whether or not our golf courses might be more utilized if in some cases they were soccer fields, for example, or other recreational uses that more of our residents could take advantage of, particularly our youth. So I'm open to all of those things. But fundamentally, being able to take the debt off the property enables us to have much more flexibility to be able to engage in contracts that will enable for recreational use without without breaking the bank for the city. I am being informed by Henry, let's see here, that how do we pull up we have 4 phone callers?
There's 4 calling in total. Only one has their hand raised, and it's the phone number ending 5140.
Oh, okay, got it. Okay, so there's one phone caller who has a number ending in 5140, and I apologize, I'm not able to see on my screen, but I know you have your hand raised, so my apologies for leaving you waiting. If we could hear from you now.
Can you hear me?
Yes, welcome.
Okay, yeah, I'm the concerned citizen guy, so yeah, thanks for taking my call. You know, the downtown has been looking grim for a while, and a lot of things are closed down already. Do you really think it's more than al fresco that's going to help the downtown corridor to generate more tax revenue?
Well, let me explain first. Oh, I'm sorry, I just cut you off.
Yeah. I got one. It's the second part of the question. I'm sorry. And,
go ahead with the second part, and then we'll answer. Yeah.
Yeah. The other question that I have relates to. I lost my train of thought. Just answer the first part of the question.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe if it comes to you, then you can jump in. Let me just explain first. The San Jose Al Fresco program. First, is not just about the downtown, it's about the entire city, because we think there are businesses of all kinds. You know, I mentioned yoga studios, restaurants, et cetera, retail that may be able to take advantage of outdoor commerce in lots of parts of our city. And Evergreen Village Square, at King and Story, we have a shopping center there. We can think of lots of places where outdoor setting could be well utilized. And it's not really about tax revenue generation. More than anything, it's about survival for those small businesses, because we know that many of them won't be viable if they're required to open under mandate that says you can only have one person at a time in your store, for example. It's just not going to be feasible. They're not going to be able to generate revenue that justifies a payroll. And so we've got to do something to give them space. And
sure.
So,
well, I mean, yeah, but the retail things go along with tax revenue. I mean, it's survival for everybody, public and private.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this, I remember the second part of my question is, are you still going to be involved with all this high density housing and mass transit? Because it seems as if the places in the United States and Europe that were hit the hardest with COVID happened to be in areas that were the most had the most people stacked on top of each other. So
yeah.
I'm wondering, is that going to change? Because it may not work in the future with having people stacked on top of each other and in, claustrophobic type mass transit.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So first, with regard to small businesses and the point of the San Jose Al Fresco, the reason why I say it's not about tax revenues, the city actually doesn't generate a lot of tax revenue off of small businesses. We generate tax revenue off, if you were to look at the breakdown, tends to come from auto sales, large big box retailers. We generate a lot of revenues of various kinds from large employers. Hotel tax, obviously, from big hotels. We know small businesses are critical to our community. They provide livelihoods for thousands of our residents. They provide color to our streets. We all want a vibrant neighborhood business district where we can walk to services, and we want to have those kinds of services and retail within walking distance if possible. So there's a lot of value in small businesses, but it's not really about the city's bottom line. It's fundamentally about helping those businesses survive. And that's really why this orientation is focused everywhere in the city. It's not going to be just downtown. We think there's a lot of creative opportunities to help the small businesses. Now, in terms of the orientation of the city toward densification, transit, high density housing, and so forth, do I think that's going to change? No, I don't. And I know obviously there'll be detractors who will say, well, what about COVID? Well, look, San Francisco is a much denser city than San Jose is. And they depend enormously on transit. And if you look at the mortality loss there as well as transmission, it is very, very low compared to lots of parts of our country. where we're seeing skyrocketing rates right now are places like Mississippi that may not have very high density, but have very poor public health infrastructure and high rates of poverty. So there are a lot of contributing factors here. Density undoubtedly is one, but density also allows us to ensure people are well informed. It ensures that if we are able to get people housed, they're certainly much safer being housed than out on the street. And frankly, we're going to need a lot of density to get a lot of people housed cost effectively. So I guess the short answer, in my view, is that yes, we're going to continue the march toward greater densification as a city and toward greater use of transit. I'm not naive about the fact that it's going to take some time before people are going to feel comfortable getting back on a transit on a bus or on a BART. And BART is going to be open here in San Jose. We expect sometime in June, and people won't be rushing to use it. I know that. But the reality is we're going to have to because we don't have any alternatives. And I suspect a life in which we are all locked up in our homes forevermore is not a life that we will believe is worth choosing. We're going to take risks as human beings. Those risks are necessarily going to be calculated risks. They're going to be measured. They're going to be accompanied by good information and good practices. And as long as we have a large amount of infection out there, we're going to be out there wearing masks and washing our hands and doing all the things we're supposed to be doing. But yes, we will, I think, once again, need transit and high density housing and all those other things. Now, obviously, the world's going to change when we get a vaccine. I'm not optimistic. I know some people think it's going to happen in a couple months. I think the fastest we've ever had a vaccine develop in this country, somewhere between 3 and 4 years. So that should tell us something. But once that vaccine emerges, and in the meantime, it won't be necessarily a vaccine, but a lot of other treatments, whether it's remdesivir or other kinds of treatments that are helpful in addressing the impacts of COVID to the human body and reducing the mortality and reducing the duration in ICU and so forth. All of those progressions are going to make this world a safer place incrementally. And over time, people will feel safer and will necessarily want to be back in public spaces again because we are social animals as human beings. And frankly, economically, we cannot, and environmentally, we cannot sustain a world in which we're all trapped in our houses and only driving in our single-person cars to wherever it is we intend to go. I think we all know what the impacts are in terms of traffic, our impacts on the planet, and basic lack of affordability of that approach. So yes, I believe we're going to continue to densify. Sorry for the long-winded answer, but this one's a complex one, and I know a lot of people are going to be weighing in over the coming years about how this is going to affect cities. I'm optimistic, particularly for those who like urban dwelling. I think cities are going to do just fine. It's going to take us some time, that's all. All right, we have now exhausted all of the hands, I believe, and I just want to say thank you to each one of you for your patience. And during these 2 hours, we've also exhausted the 2 hours, and I want to thank all of our senior city officials who've been on, of course, starting with Jim Shannon, who worked so hard with his team to put this budget together. Chief Heather Randall, John Cicerelli, Director of Parks and Recreation, Nancy Klein at OED, Andrea Maestri, and Jill Bourne at our libraries. We'll be having more of these conversations, as I mentioned, one Saturday, I'm told, another one on the 18th. Okay, the one Saturday is at 10 a.m., so feel free to tell your friends. One on the 18th at 6 p.m. And that'll be in Spanish, and then in Vietnamese on the 20th at 6 p.m. So we'll continue to get the word out. We appreciate if you'd help us as well. And thank you, everyone. Please stay healthy.